A good Sunday to you. How are you, my dear friends? One moment while I get the video before me. I always have to start the stream so that I can then open it and see the comments so that I can respond. Okay, who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? I see Randy Lieberman Herman has joined. Patsy White is in from Vermont. Janice Beanstalk has joined. Lindsay Adams and Steve Giger. If we're personally friends, then I see when people show up. That's why I can do that before they comment. Vincent Baker says shalom. Randy is in from Florida. Lindsay from Ohio. James Roth in the house from Indianapolis. Debbie Reagan from Atlanta. Lynn is in from Texas. Fantastic. Great to see you all. What's going on? I'm seeing angry faces and sad faces. Did I miss something? Did something happen I'm not aware of? Let me know. Zach Perry says hello. Okay. Welcome, my friends. And Sam Beckham says, Laura and Sam from Indiana. Welcome to the show, Laura and Sam. Great to have you with us. Okay. Today we're gonna get into a little bit of nuance. We're gonna learn about a new kind of offering that we haven't covered yet in our journey through the Talmud, and see how it differs. So we've already encountered the chatas, the sin offering, and a chatas is brought for a sin where the intentional violation of it would result in charas, excision at the hands of heaven. And the unwitting violation of such a Torah prohibition, you didn't do it on purpose, you didn't mean to do it, you didn't know that it was prohibited, you had some reason, why you wouldn't have done it if you knew better in that situation, so it was an unwitting transgression. And so in that situation, we bring the sin offering, the chatas. Today we encounter the guilt offering, the Asham, and it's a little bit different. So it's going to be a similar animal, but not the same, brought in a similar way, but not the same. But what we're talking about today is the difference of when we bring it, for what situation we bring it. And basically the Asham comes in three broad categories. The first is the guilt offering of the nazir, or the one with tzara'as. So the nazir is somebody who took a vow upon himself not to drink wine or eat any product from the vine, right? He doesn't eat grapes, he doesn't drink wine, not grape juice, nothing. And this was a vow that people would generally take for a limited amount of time, usually for a month, because they wanted to sort of raise themselves up to a higher standard and a more strict kind of he just wants to come closer to God, and so he takes a vow upon himself. The sages actually frown a little bit on the nazir because it's an unnecessary vow, and vows are, when you take a vow, then you are now bound by a law that you wouldn't be bound by otherwise, and then if you come to commit a sin and transgress your own vow, the whole situation was unnecessary. And that's why our sages generally look down on any unnecessary vows, including that of the nazir. But the vow of the nazir is spelled out in the Torah. Likewise, the Asham is brought by the one with tzara'as, so the one who develops, often translated as leprosy, but it's not. It's a skin eruption that only existed in ancient Israel and was a physical manifestation of a spiritual malady. Those two, the nazir and the offering of one who is now recovering and is being purified from his tzara'as, that's the first category. The second category for the Asham is in cases where one is uncertain if he committed a transgression, where if he was certain, he would bring the chatas, he would bring the sin offering, right? But he thinks, I might have done it, but I'm not sure if I did it. so I'm going to bring the Asham of uncertainty, the guilt offering of uncertainty, right? That's why it's called a guilt offering, not a sin offering. He's feeling the guilt because he might have done it. He put himself in a situation where he might have done it, but he's not sure if he did it. And that's why he would bring the Asham of uncertainty rather than the chatas, the sin offering. The third category where an Asham may be brought is the definite Asham. So this is a specialized sin offering, as it were, for just a few situations. The definite Asham is brought for robbery. So if somebody stole, and then he's going to return what he stole, plus a fifth, and then he's going to bring the offering at the temple. That would be the definite Asham. Second group of this third category would be misuse of hekdesh, meaning that some money or an animal or something of value was consecrated as a donation to the temple. Either it was going to be brought as an offering, or it was money that was going to be used for the upkeep of the temple. In some way, it was consecrated to a holy use, and he misused it. He used it for his own benefit, and then he realizes that he did that, so he would bring the definite Asham for misuse of consecrated goods. And there's the third group within this third category is highly specific. This has to do with one who cohabits with a particular kind of female slave. It's a Jewish man in ancient Israel who cohabits with a Canaanite slave, and it gets more particularized. It was something that was described ambiguously in the Torah and elsewhere in the Talmud. We're not going to get into it today. They go through a whole bunch of discussion and analysis of all the different possibilities of what this means, and they realize that there's all kinds of contradictions in when you can bring it, when you can't bring it, and did you commit a sin and did you not commit a sin. And when they finally finish the analysis, what they come up with is that you're only going to bring the definite Asham for cohabiting with a Canaanite slave, female slave, in the specific situation that she was a Canaanite slave co-owned by two Jewish men. One of them freed her, right? So he gave up this was slavery, right? We're not making any excuses. This was in a time when slavery existed. So when there was slavery in ancient Israel, you could own a Canaanite slave, and it would be possible that two people owned her. Like two people co-own a house or co-own a car, they co-owned this female slave. One of them gave her her freedom. He freed the half that he owned, he gave it to her. The other one has not given up his right of ownership in the Canaanite slave. She becomes betrothed to a Hebrew slave, right? So a slave owner could allow, might even command, but certainly could allow his slaves to become betrothed to each other. So in this case, the Canaanite slave became betrothed to a Hebrew slave. The Hebrew slave is only temporarily a slave. The Canaanite slave was permanently a slave, but they were betrothed to each other, and now a free Jew, could be the owner, could be just someone free, cohabits with her. This is not a case of rape. He probably just didn't know that this was her status vis-a-vis being owned by one master, freed by the other, and betrothed to a Hebrew slave. If all of those conditions exist, then this person who cohabits with the Canaanite slave brings the definite Asham, the definite guilt offering. Now, the key to understand here is that in the case of cohabiting with this Canaanite slave who's half-owned, half free, betrothed to a Hebrew slave, is in this case, it doesn't matter whether you knew what her status was, whether you did it on purpose or not. If you cohabited with that woman and that was her status, you need to bring, you are liable to bring the definite Asham offering. Not only that, if you cohabited with her 5 times, you bring one offering. And this is why we're studying this now, because you saw yesterday we were talking about the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about when somebody does certain kinds of transgressions, two within one lapse of awareness, and then becomes aware that the first one was a prohibited thing. He shouldn't have done it. It was unwitting. Now he has to bring the chatas. And then the question was, if he then before he realizes that he did it twice in that same lapse of awareness, and then he does realize the awareness comes at two different times, does he bring one chatas or two? Here in the case of the Asham, the guilt offering, whether he's cohabited with her one time or 5 times, he brings one Asham for all of those transgressions. And even if he learns that he did it, that he was guilty of having, of cohabiting with this woman who was not permitted to him and he shouldn't have done it, he didn't know her status when he did, whatever the situation was, then he learns, and then he does it again, it's still going to be one Asham for all the times that he cohabited with her. That is per the opinion of Ulla. Rav Hamnuna adds, however, if he, let's say he had this affair with this woman, he didn't know that she was a half-owned slave, betrothed to a Hebrew slave, he didn't know that, he had sex with her several times, and then he learns that she was off limits to him, and then he keeps doing it, right? He continues the affair. It's still going to be one Asham offering for all of the times that he cohabited with her, unless he says, okay, I shouldn't have done that, I was wrong, I realize I'm wrong, and now I designate this goat or this sheep, I'm not sure actually which animal you're supposed to bring for the Asham, I haven't studied that right now, but whatever the correct, appropriate animal for the Asham offering is, he designates this animal to be the Asham offering, and then he cohabits with her again. Now he owes an additional Asham offering, because once he designated the animal, so that animal would carry with it the atonement for all the previous transgressions. But once the animal is designated, if he transgresses again, now he becomes liable to bring a new offering for all of those instances after he became aware and designated the animal to be the offering. Okay. And the open question was whether one needs to know that he did it in order to designate the definite Asham. And the answer is no, he doesn't need to know. He doesn't know that he did it, right? Once he's liable because he did it. And this is a little different than matters pertaining to Shabbos transgressions. And so now we look at a different case directly related to Shabbos. So let's say that there's some plants lying on the ground, and it looks like they're detached, right? So somebody came along and cut a bunch of flowers and left them on the ground. So you reach down and you pick up this bunch of flowers to bring inside, and you're gonna make a nice little flower arrangement inside, or you're gonna eat them, right? So maybe this is food plants, and somebody came and cut a bunch of them outside, or let's say you cut them on Friday, you left them on the ground, and it's in your courtyard, right? And then you just go to pick up this bunch of plants, and when you pick them up, a plant comes up with the bunch that you realize was still attached to the ground. Now, the plants that were cut before that are detached, you just pick them up and bring them in, no problem. The plant that was still attached to the ground, when you grabbed this bunch and picked it up, you performed the prohibited work of reaping. Right? This is like reaping. This is like when you go out into a farm field and you cut the wheat to bring it in, or you cut the whatever plants, harvesting. It's harvesting, right? So if you cannot detach plants, you can't cut off a branch, you can't cut off a flower, you can't cut off a vegetable, you can't cut off a leaf that's growing in the ground or in a pot for that matter on Shabbos. So all you intended to do was pick up detached plants. Accidentally, you grabbed a plant that was still attached to the ground. Did you commit a transgression for which you are liable to bring the chatas? This is the chatas, the sin offering applies here because if you harvested, if you reaped on Shabbos intentionally, the punishment would be charas at the hands of heaven. You did it unintentionally. Is it unwitting or unawares? This is what we're distinguishing right now. You had no idea that plant was attached. You knew that it was Shabbos. You knew that one is not allowed to harvest a plant. So it's not the unwitting case of you didn't know it was Shabbos or you didn't know that it's prohibited to reap a plant. It's just you didn't know the plant was attached. In that case, says Rava, no liability. No liability, and all agree with him. What if there were detached plants on the ground but they were too big, right? Like they were too big to what you wanted to bring inside. So you brought scissors out and you cut near the ground these plants that were already detached. Again, by mistake, you cut a plant that is attached to the ground. Did you now commit a transgression for which you are liable to bring the sin offering? Rava says, no, it's the same as the first case. You knew that it's Shabbos. You knew that you can't harvest a plant. Your intention was just to cut some plants that had already been detached from the ground, and this is permitted on Shabbos. You can cut a plant just like you can, cut food on your plate with a fork and knife. But when you accidentally cut that plant that was attached to the ground, according to Rava, no liability. You are exempt. According to Abaye's friend and disputing partner, you are liable. What is the difference? For Abaye, the difference is that in the first case, you just meant to pick up. Totally allowed and had nothing to do with severing a plant, with cutting a plant by mistake. In the second case, because you were cutting, you did the act of cutting. The actual action that you did was cutting. You didn't know that you were going to cut a plant that was still attached to the ground, but you performed the act of cutting, and that act resulted in a prohibited labor because you cut an attached plant. For Abaye, your intent was close enough to an unwitting transgression to be an unwitting transgression, and you become liable to bring the sin offering. Whom does the law follow? In disputes between Rava and Abaye, the law follows Rava. So this is a more lenient opinion, and the law is with the more lenient opinion. So if you meant to cut plants, and by mistake you cut a plant that's still attached to the ground, you didn't commit a transgression, you're not liable. You didn't mean to do that. You had no idea that you would be cutting a plant that was attached to the ground. In the law of criminal law, you had no mens rea. You had no intent. Okay, but for Abaye, this was an unwitting transgression. For Rava, this was a unaware transgression, unawares, right? He was unawares that he was doing something wrong. Another example is brought where we find a similar distinction. And this is in the case of idolatry. And this case is quite interesting because it has some contemporary counterpart, as we shall see, in our highly charged and emotional age that we live in. So, it is absolutely prohibited to engage in avodah zarah, idolatry, right? God has told us, no uncertain terms. He is a jealous God, and he doesn't want his children bowing to any other God but him. Why? Because there is no other God but him. It is just offensive to God if we bow down to idols. It's childish and offensive. Okay. What if a person thinks that he's bowing out of respect to a synagogue. Now, we don't bow to synagogues, okay? But in his heart, this person thought that there was a synagogue right there, and he just sort of, what came over his heart at that moment is, you know what, I've been distant from God, and I'm sorry, God, I'm sorry. And he bows his head, really in an act of atonement, and he's using the synagogue nearby, as a place to sort of focus his energy. Like, this is a place where God's presence is, God is everywhere, but God's presence perhaps is felt a little stronger in a synagogue. So he wants to just bow out of respect to God in the direction of the synagogue. But by mistake, he bows to an idol. There's an idol between him and the synagogue. He didn't see it. He wasn't aware. Maybe he saw this statue, but he didn't know it was an idol, or maybe he didn't see it at all. But the result is that thinking he's bowing to God by focusing his attention on a nearby synagogue, by mistake, he bows to an idol of some pagan god. Is this person liable to bring an offering for bowing to that idol? Answer, no. He has not committed a transgression. His heart was fully focused on God. He knows that you're not allowed to bow to idols. He never would bow down to an idol. He was simply unaware that while he was bowing, there was an idol in line with him and the direction of his bow. Second case, imagine you're living in an ancient kingdom, right? So this is not so hard to imagine, actually. Even today, if you go to a place like North Korea, there are statues of the supreme leader all over the place, and people bow to the statues of the supreme leader. Unclear if they think he's a god or not. In the ancient world, for sure, there were people, not all people, but many people, who would deify a king or an emperor and bow to, especially one who had passed on. This happened in Rome a lot. So former emperors, some people had sort of a cult that they would call that the former emperor a god. He's now a god, and they would make statue of him and bow to that statue and even ask that dead emperor via this statue to grant them their wishes. Okay, so there's a statue of the emperor, maybe the living emperor, maybe the dead emperor, it doesn't matter. A Jew comes along and makes a bow to that statue out of respect for governmental authority. He doesn't think it's a god. He knows it's prohibited to bow to statues of gods. He is making nothing more than a show of respect to a government authority. Is he liable to bring a sin offering? No, he is not. He is not thinking that he's bowing down to a god, and he doesn't think of that statue as a god. Now, we might say, if he's around people who consider it a god, and now he knows that it's a god, to them, is it the same case? Maybe, maybe not. In fact, we're going to come back to something similar to that in a moment. But generally speaking, if he's bowing simply out of respect, he has done nothing wrong. It's not that we're never allowed to bow. It's that we cannot bow to an idol. Likewise, I had this question years ago when I used to do Taekwondo, Korean martial arts, and we would bow to each other on the mat all the time. And as I was starting to become religious, I was like, oh, is this okay? Can I bow, to another person just out of respect? Answer, yes, yes you can. But now we come to the case of there's a statue that is an idol. It is known to be an idol. People bow to that statue because it's an idol, right? And you're there, and then you're with a person who worships that idol. But this person has a hold on you, either because you fear that person. Let's say you're with a government official in a country that is dangerous for Jews, and that if you don't bow down, and that you're going to bow down just out of fear of that person. Or you love that person. This is actually more difficult. right? So imagine if it's a family member and the family member worships the idol and you want to have a good relationship. Maybe it's your parent, God forbid, right? So maybe your parent worships an idol. Now, this is very tricky. We do not bow to idols knowing that they are idols. You just don't do that. And you don't commit idolatry because your parent asks you to commit idolatry, just like you don't desecrate Shabbos because your parent asks you to desecrate Shabbos. But if you bow out of love or fear, thinking in your heart, I'm just doing this to propitiate my relative, I don't believe in this idol, I don't submit to this idol, I'm not bowing to the idol, I just, don't want to get killed, or I don't want to, lose my relationship with this relative. So Abaye says, you're liable. You shouldn't have done it. You now have to bring a sin offering. Even if you felt you had no choice, you're liable to bring the sin offering. And Rava says, you're not liable. This is very interesting. You are exempt because you didn't have intent to commit the sin. Now, you're exempt, but it's not no transgression. It is a transgression, and you should avoid that situation. You're just exempt from bringing the sin offering, right? You haven't violated a Torah prohibition. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I'm about 99.999% sure that you have violated a rabbinic prohibition. You don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to do that. You don't want to come close to flirting with idolatry. But if you're in that situation, and God forbid, you just can't get out of it, and you bow with no intent to worship that idol or propitiate the idol or give it any kind of respect, you're just doing it out of love or fear for the person. So you did transgress a rabbinic prohibition, but you didn't violate a Torah prohibition, and therefore you are not liable to bring the sin offering per the opinion of Rava. Per the opinion of Abaye, you are liable, but as we just learned earlier, in disputes between Rava and Abaye, we follow the opinion of Rava. That's what I've got for us today. Let me check the questions and comments. Okay. What have I got here? Carol Chappelle says shalom. Anna Ruth Roca, that's a name I haven't seen in a while. Welcome, good to see you. Pauline Michael is in from Arkansas, and Delaney Green Johnson says shalom from Jersey. Melissa Beineman says one Asham for multiple offenses and even repeat offenses after you know. That's the surprise, right? That's the surprise. Yes, but if you designate the offering, then you've made a distinction in time, and that offering will atone for all the previous violations, and thereafter you need a new one. And that is only for the the transgressions that are atoned for with the Asham offering. The chatas offering is different. Here the awareness matters. Stephen Winkler says shalom from Las Vegas. Robin Reagan says, if he didn't know her situation, how was he responsible? Good question. And the answer is, for certain things, and a lot of what goes on in this page, I didn't kind of go into it, but there is a distinction between Shabbos and other kinds of transgressions. For Shabbos, you do have to have some kind of an intent, but there are some transgressions where if you did them, you need to bring the offering, whether you knew or not. So in the case of bringing the definite Asham offering for that very specific case of cohabiting with the Canaanite slave woman who is half free and half owned and betrothed to a Hebrew slave, whether you knew that was the situation or not, you are liable to bring the Asham offering when you learn. And even if you didn't learn, so that's the question, like you didn't learn, but you have reason to believe you might have slept with such a person, so then you can bring that offering. And that's a distinction between the Asham and the chatas. The laws of these offerings are very difficult. Right now, we're sort of staying on the surface and making, just a few of the distinctions that have to do with intent and with liability and with awareness and when you become aware. It's like that question that was asked in the 50s, what did you know and when did you know it? Right? So in the laws of sin offerings and guilt offerings, that question, what did you know and when did you know it, is of vital importance. But the question is applied differently in the case of the sin offering and the guilt offering. And I think we can see why they're translated differently, right? The sin offering is because you did it. The guilt offering is because you feel it. But some of those guilt offerings are like the sin offering, and that's why it's called the definite sin offering, the definite guilt offering. But many of those cases that involve the Asham, the guilt offering, are the Asham of uncertainty. The Asham offering, the guilt offering of uncertainty, which you can bring when you're not sure that you committed the transgression for which you would be liable to bring the sin offering. You're not sure, you may not have a way to become sure. So because it's a situation of uncertainty and you want to make sure you're clear, and you're not going to know, there's not going to be a way to get the answer, did I genuinely, with certainty, commit it? So that's why we have the mechanism of bringing the Asham of uncertainty, the guilt offering of uncertainty. And I just want to reiterate what I said yesterday, that what these offerings are all about, especially as we learned in Rabbi Yochanan's approach to them, it's not about hammering a person with how guilty you are. Right? We're all guilty of many things. These offerings were this opportunity to face up to what you've done, to study what you've done, and to take a physical action that is going to give you a process of purification and atonement so you can come out the other side. We don't have the opportunity to bring offerings anymore. And in the modern world, slaughtering animals in order to assuage us of our guilt or, to expiate our guilt for certain things, it wouldn't have the same impact on us emotionally that it had in the ancient world. In the ancient world, it's just the most normal thing. The most standard kind of worship was to bring animal offerings. Today, it's about prayer. It's about tefillah, prayer, teshuva, atonement, and tzedakah, charity. When we look into ourselves and we can identify things that we've done wrong and that we are going to resolve to do better, it's just not enough to say, oh man, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to do better next time. Because we know that little process right there is likely to fail. And that's why we got to do the three irons in the fire, right? The teshuva is the atonement. I'm going to really examine my deed, why I did it, what I was doing, what was the situation, how did I put myself in that situation, in what organized fashion am I going to, create a reminder for myself and train myself so that it doesn't happen again. The tefillah is the prayer. I'm going to beg God's forgiveness, but I'm also going to pray that God strengthen me so that when I'm in that situation again, I'll be strong enough to resist. And tzedakah is that definite action that we can take. The tzedakah is very similar to bringing the offering, right? We're sacrificing some of our wealth to a good cause. What's nice about tzedakah is that instead of the offering simply going up in smoke, it goes to help people, right? But when we give tzedakah, we can have in mind that this is helping us in our process of atonement or self-improvement, self-betterment, coming closer to God, and coming closer to the mission for which we were sent into this world. Beautiful. That's what I've got for us today, my holy brothers and sisters. Kelly Sue Cherry Ramirez says, I have a daughter-in-law who is Buddhist. Am I complacent or sinning when I stand aside as she does her prayers? That's a tough question. I don't think you're doing anything wrong. First, I don't know. I'd really have to think about that. But if this is a family member and you're just being respectful and you're not participating but you're appreciating what she does, or you're just observing, I don't think you've done something wrong. I don't think you have a duty, to tell her that you don't believe in that. Do you need to step back? To be honest, I don't know that much about Buddhism and what is actually going on there, and is a God being propitiated. I haven't studied Buddhism. I just don't know about it. The field is generally difficult. But for example, if you're alongside somebody, who's Christian or Muslim, and you're Jewish, and they're praying, and they're praying to the one God, right? So you're not going to join in prayer with them if there's a chance that those prayers can be misconstrued as your prayers. That's a different situation. But other monotheistic religions are much less problematic in this regard. There are many Jews who won't enter a church because they consider that there's symbology in there, which is just not consistent with Jewish belief. But when you're talking about somebody who bows to a statue, and maybe that's what you're talking about. I don't know if Buddhists bow to a Buddha. I don't know. I'm very ignorant. I'm sorry. So the question, but I think even according to what we've learned here, if somebody who believes in that, they're bowing to a statue, and you're just standing there doing nothing, I'm pretty sure you've done nothing wrong. But to get a better answer, ask your local rabbi. It's going to always be the best answer to the question, unless I've done the research and I'm prepared to answer. All right, I don't want to steer you all wrong. I always pray that I don't make a mistake and steer people wrong. So when I don't know something, I just tell you I don't know. Okay, my dear friends, it's great to be with you. With God's help, we'll continue tomorrow on page 73. I don't know if I said at the beginning of today, this was page 72. Chapter 7, Mishnah number 1. I believe tomorrow we'll finally come to the end of the commentary on the first Mishnah of chapter 7, and then we'll be able to move on to the second Mishnah. Wishing you all the best. Take care, my holy brothers and sisters.